David, thank you for joining us. Welcome. You and I have known each other for quite some time, clear back to 2008 when we started working together. It feels like yesterday in some ways, but I appreciate you joining, and I'm grateful that you were able to spend some time with me, and I look forward to our conversation. Do you want to take maybe just a minute and introduce yourself and talk about maybe your background, but also what you're currently doing, and then at the end, we'll also share more details about your business and what you can provide and to my customers as well. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my favorite topic is myself, so I'll try to be brief. But I've been working in the digital analytics space since the 90s. We had launched a website back in 1997. I was working as a writer for a mall-based record store chain. So we were really early trying to launch a website, informational only. And about a week later, my manager came to me and said, "Hey, how many people have come to our website?" And I had no way of finding out. So I found out how to get that answer, which back then was log file analysis. But I was fascinated that all these people from around the world were coming and what search terms, which you could actually see back then, they were using to find us. So that's how I got into it. I was the director of CRM for a startup company called Spree.com. After that, was trying to be Amazon with 50 people, which did not work real well. From there, I was a CRM director for Mars Music, which was a Guitar Center competitor, started by the guy that started Office Depot. That went well for a while until they had some inventory challenges, and that eventually went chapter 7. So I went knocking on the door of this place called 1-800-96 Hotels in Miami, where I was living at the time. Turned out that was the right door to knock on. That became hotels.com, and I was reporting directly to the president of the company. Director of CRM, reported to the president when I moved to Dallas. And that's where I met Josh James from Omniture. I was doing a speech at a Internet Marketing Association. Josh saw me, offered me a job at Omniture. And 2005, I took that job. We started working together a few years later. And at Omniture, I started out as an individual contributor, wound up running their consulting organization. And then after I left Adobe, Google hired me to build something similar to what we had done at Adobe, focused on attribution. So I worked at Google for 5 years doing different projects, mostly focused on attribution. And most recently, I was employed by Zeus, the dating app. I was their VP of Data and Analytics, and helped them with their acquisition by Spark Networks. So now I am doing Kirschner Solutions, which we can talk about a little bit more, but in a nutshell, it's analytics, attribution, and vendor and talent management.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know you've done a number of presentations for some local companies as well as companies throughout the nation and throughout the world as well. And I appreciate so much your willingness to take some time with me and with my customers. So what I want to do, Dave, is let's harken back to 2008. It was, at the time I was with Omniture, it sounds like you were with Omniture around that same time. And we were in a knife fight with a company it used to be called Website Story, and then it became Visual Sciences. And so I think Josh and Jim and those guys, got together and said, hey, rather than have this be a knife fight on every single customer, let's just merge and join forces and instead of fight each other, let's go join and then fight everybody else. And so when that merger occurred with Visual Sciences, they were headquartered down in San Diego. One of the biggest challenges that came out of that was, one, we became the de facto leader in analytics, right? We had the most customers and all of that. But what we had is two disparate products, right? They did similar things, but they were very different in terms of their engineering and the way they were written, and the interface was different. And there were so many things that were different about what we did that I think it settled in on us, and we're like, oh man, now we got to, it's funny. I've done probably 20 M&A deals, and it seems like there's always that realization of, okay, we did this, but now what do we do, right? And so, there were hundreds of customers and representing tens of millions of dollars in annual contract value that we had to figure out a way to migrate from HBX, which was the Visual Sciences product, over to the Omniture Site Catalyst product. And And I think early on we realized, oh man, we've got to dedicate some key senior leaders to help us get through this. And so Avonlea Wilson ran kind of the account management side of things, and she was responsible to kind of run the contracts and all that kind of stuff. And then you were willing and able and did a great job and took on the effort of driving that technical migration team. And I know you had to staff it, you had to, figure out all the protocols, and you had to basically manage that. And it took us 4 years, I think, before we finally kind of put the nail in the final, process around the migration. And, the goal, of course, was to come out of there with more ACV and more revenue than we had. And I'm proud to say, for you and Evelyn and everybody else, we actually ended up at about 104% of retention, including upsell and cross sell and all that. And so it was, absolutely a success for the business overall. And you were a big part of that. So let me just kind of hand the baton and let's talk a little bit about kind of what that took. How did you form the team? What were some of the protocols that you put in place, and, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, thank you for the compliment. I mean, you were close to that as well, and it was definitely a team effort, but it's what got me to San Diego, where I live now. I was working remotely for the entire time I was at Omniture prior to that from Florida. And so I came out here and found a team that was frankly very disenfranchised. I don't know, how widely known the details are, but when the Omniture leadership came here to San Diego to announce the acquisition of HBX, which it effectively was, they did so in a way that made the HBX employees feel, shall we say, less than.
Yes.
I think "we won" was one of the quotes that I heard coming from that speech. So I inherited a team that was very talented, but we were bitter enemies, and I had to get them excited about Omniture Site Catalyst and their new careers. In some ways, it wasn't difficult because I was, throughout my time at Omniture, including San Diego and Utah, I've been blessed with really great employees and managers. And so we had, the opportunity to build a team here based on the skill sets that we had both in, at the time, Provo, or Orem rather, and in San Diego. And the skill sets were rather different. The San Diego team, much more developer based. A lot of the people, what they would consider account management was really more like what we would consider a technical project. So I had a lot of people who had great hard skills, but not the soft skills necessary to interface with customers. So I went looking for a mix of people and found a lot in Utah. One of the great things that we used early on, and I see Adobe still does their analytics contests. We used to do that back in the day.
Yeah, remember that.
Yeah. Brent Dykes was the one who sort of kick-started that, and I was one of the judges for 3 of the 4 years, I think, that it was in Utah. And we got a lot of great talent from that. Not only the people that won, but the second and third place people we usually extend offers to as well. It was hard to find talent back then. I mean, you're talking almost 12 years ago now, or, so there wasn't you just didn't have all these people who had experience in web analytics. There wasn't a degree in web analytics at the time. The team in Utah that I was managing previously was split into 2 groups, essentially. There was business analysts who were more advisor, account manager types, strategists, and the technical folks, which is more like what I had in San Diego. Mm-hmm. So for starters, it was difficult getting the 2 together. They didn't physically sit together, but we did have people come down to spend significant amounts of time in the San Diego office to help mentor people and get them up to speed, get them excited. And I think after, a little while, they saw that, okay, this wasn't the greatest start that we got off to, but these are okay people. Their product is good. I can get excited about this. Let's go. Yeah. And we were off to the races from there.
Well, and I think the other thing that I think sometimes we forget about is that not only did the team in San Diego feel disenfranchised, but we also had a bunch of customers that were like, you know what, I purposely chose HBX over Site Catalyst, and now you're forcing me to kind of go back. And so there were a lot of challenges from the customer perspective as well.
Yeah, I had a few difficult phone calls when I first got here. I think I got a lifetime of handling challenges just in the first few weeks, because you're absolutely right. Nobody went with Omniture without doing their due diligence, and hundreds and hundreds of customers had decided that Website Story fit their needs better. Some of them had just signed contracts with Website Story within weeks of the acquisition. They were probably the least happy. And those are the ones I started with, because I knew that, in terms of getting people on board, you have to start, sort of at the beginning, backward. We did obviously look at the annual revenue and give, a little bit bigger push to those larger clients, but we wanted to ensure that people understood the value of Site Catalyst. And it was an objection handling master's class that I got, just like in a baptism by fire, really. But again, it was when you have a product that's good and people believe in it, and there's a demonstrable history of success with that product, it makes it a lot easier to sell in. And frankly, we had that. We had attracted more Fortune 500 companies. Omniture was a marketing machine. I mean, I think even we might agree that at one point we did not have the best product, especially for retail, but we killed all those retail accounts, and it is now the best product. But yeah, I mean, it was an objection handling masterclass.
Yeah, I remember. I think I spent as much time in San Diego as I spent in Utah that year. In fact, my family we would drive down, and my family would go to Disneyland while I drove down to San Diego and would work, and then I'd come back and go to them and meet them in the park. And so, we had annual passes that year, and we took advantage of that. But it was great, and the team down there was amazing. Ray Rauch and you and Avonlea and some of the others were just not only quality people, but we're friends. We spent
Yeah.
a lot of
In
time.
fact, not only do I still keep in touch with a lot of those people, but I would say probably nearly half of the people that I managed in San Diego still work for Adobe. So good for them and good for Adobe.
Yeah. So what were the challenges? I mean, you woke up one day and it's like, okay, now I'm going to go and be assigned to driving this migration. What were some of the biggest technological challenges that you ran into? They basically did the same kind of thing, but the code on the page and the way it was approached and the interface and all that stuff were pretty significantly different. And so I'm just curious as to kind of what were your steps or process that you went through to make that successful.
That was one area where Omniture got its ducks in a row really early on, and really kind of under the leadership of Matt Belkin. There was this best practices group, and we immediately began setting out creating playbooks. This is people like Adam Greco and Daryl Acumen that were working on these with me, who've gone on to have phenomenal careers. But these playbooks were what we call the Fusion methodology, and it was a step-by-step guide to implementation that was both a developer document that they could follow with the instructions, as well as a guide for a business person to understand, oh, well, now that I have this report, here's what I can do with that. Here are some use cases. And they were very visual. They were pretty dense materials. They were, not like light reading for nighttime, but they were really well done. And that enabled us to take a semi-templated approach, knowing that each client, is unique and has unique implementation needs. But it gave us a foundation, and it gave them, milestone planning that they could plan around. There were phases in the implementation that they could see the progress. They could start to see more data flowing in, et cetera. That was really that Fusion methodology was key, because a lot of the people wanted to augment their Website Story implementation with Omniture rather than do a rip and replace. And, we wanted to do a rip and replace for a few reasons. One, it's the right thing to do when you're going with a new vendor. Two, we now own those assets, and all of those double hits counted against our profitability. So you don't really want to maintain two concurrent systems, but we had to for a number of customers for a number of years.
Yeah, good question on that, David. I remember that we went from multiple servers, and slowly over time we would kind of unplug them and instead of 50 servers, it was 30, and then it was 10, and then it was 5. And I still remember it was almost like this boneyard of equipment that we would go down. And at one point it was, we almost made it a kind of a ceremonial thing when we unplugged the last one. And but like I said, it was 4 years before we were able to turn the last one off. And yeah, it took some time to get through it.
Yeah, it was definitely an Office Space kind of moment, at the end there, just matching it. But yeah, it was great too because I had very little turnover on that team. We lost a few key people from the HBX side. Like I said, there's always personalities involved in acquisitions, and on both sides of this acquisition, I think you had some pretty strong personalities. And as such, a lot of the people who were loyal to the HBX leadership went with them. They went and formed Telium and have
Yeah.
very wildly successful company there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the people that I had, there was like almost zero turnover. They worked hard, they traveled a lot, and using that methodology. What was nice about the fusion methodology, James, was that it had those use cases. I don't think people had ever really been able to. You always had the two camps. You had the people who were the analysts, and then you had their managers who then reported up through the chain. And the analysts always knew what was going on because they're analysts and they can read reports and understand. Very few of them had that storytelling ability that they needed to interpret it and manage up the chain. But tools like Omniture really did democratize the data in terms of sharing dashboards, in terms of just generating really high quality reports that a CEO can glance at and understand quickly. And that it was a combination of people and product that made it successful. But as you alluded to, the goal was to keep these tens of millions of dollars streaming in. When you have a software as a service business, your ARR is the key metric. And that was another area where we had an advantage. A lot of the features that we had weren't available in HBX. And so there were things that we were able to sell in, parts that are now part of the Adobe Analytics suite. But that was one major advantage. And in many cases, we had to give people a trial run of those so that they could get a level of comfort and see the value. But, just treading with caution, being respectful of the customer's desires and, respectful of your own staff's needs was what really made that program. And I can't underestimate Avonlea Wilson's contributions to it. She was there prior to me. She was a website story account management lead and really, really did a great job of helping me inculcate into that culture and convince people that Omniture was the right solution.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts on that. When we started working together down there, I don't think we fully appreciated the challenge that would come. And so I know that, Avonlea was huge and she was really involved all the way through the whole process. But it was challenging for a number of reasons. One is I think we made the right decision early on to not force a contract decision, but wait until the contracts came up for renewal and then focus on trying to renew them. And I think that was a huge, huge decision. I remember Chris Harrington was the one that was really pushing for that. He goes, guys, we don't want to create, hundreds of conversations where RFPs and things could occur. And then customers are like, no, this is the way I can get out of it and that kind of thing. And so the team had to stay in that kind of support mode as we slowly made that transition. And I think that was a brilliant step on his part. And then the other thing that was a challenge was how do you keep people, especially really good people, how do you keep people engaged in a project that feels like they're on life support up until a certain point when the machine gets unplugged, right? And I think that's probably where some of the retention of employees was challenging because, at some point they're going to say, you know what, eventually I'm going to work myself out of a job. But I know that you and Avonlea did a tremendous job of figuring out that. And then as people dropped off, I know you helped them find new roles within Adobe or Omniture at the time. And so I'm just curious how you kind of manage that piece.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's always that component of change management that goes through the individual's mind, like how will this affect me? Am I going to be relevant in this new company? And many of these people had spent years and years perfecting HBX, and now they had to learn an entirely new tool, which A, not something they really wanted to do, and B, now they're starting over at the bottom. Now they're like, at the lowest rung of talent. And so it was a challenge, but it was a very aspirational group, very young team that I acquired out here, and they saw the opportunity. Of course, there were stock options involved as well, but I don't think that was really the carrot as much as a lot of them had nurtured relationships with these clients and genuinely wanted to see their clients succeed. And knowing that HBX was going away, they had a choice to come over to our platform or shop elsewhere, but they had these relationships nurtured, and that's so important. Even those people who eventually decided, you know what, this isn't really what I want to do long term, I would get on the phone, or I was in Orem frequently, even though I was living in Florida. I came there every month, and I'd talk about, the staff down there, who was at risk, who was in need of retention work, et cetera. But also, we were expanding so quickly back then. All these new positions were opening up, and I always was keeping an eye out for, more relevant roles for my, especially the technical staff. And a lot of them, like I said, I think probably something like 40% of the people that I worked with here still are at Adobe today.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing that sometimes people forget about the M&A process is, there's different types of acquisitions, right? There's technological bolt-on, there's customer acquisition, which is kind of what this one was. It was like, let's quickly win hundreds of customers and bring them into the fold, and so we don't have to fight over each one. But the one that's kind of forgotten, I think, a lot of times is what we call acqui-hires, which, it's the people, it's the smarts and the brain power of the people that work for those companies that come in and provide immediate impact on the overall business, also kind of lead people through that change. And so sometimes I think we forget, and you're right, there's probably 40% or so of the people that were part of the visual sciences organization that are still a part of Adobe now. And that was, it was interesting. Adobe acquired us just about a year and a half or so into the migration with HBX. So Omniture went from acquiring to being acquired. And so it was kind of a crazy time, but that's one of the things that we got some tremendous, very talented people as part of the acquisition as well.
Yeah, we absolutely did. And, being part of that clean room was the first time experience for me. I was really honored. Steve Wellen asked me to represent the field organization, which was like 1,500 people at the time in the clean room. So, here I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with the CTO of Adobe and Josh and, all of these people who were several pay grades above me. But as is often the case in those types of meetings, work usually gets delegated down. So, we were charged with finding something compelling that because the street was sort of scratching its head at the time, like, why would Adobe buy this measurement company? Yeah. And so, as you recall, we had the benchmark reports. And I had the brilliant idea that, well, Adobe's creative. These are pretty ugly reports. Why don't we just skin these benchmark reports and call it like the digital index or something like that? And within a week, we had something that we could share with the public, and the digital index has grown leaps and bounds since that humble beginning. But it was that kind of ideation process that was really energizing, and that only happens when different companies do come together.
Yeah, and I think it's funny to see. It's like when an organization starts out, it's fun to see the pictures and the kind of the memories or the road mark, milestones of the process. And now Adobe's, index is a big thing. It's on CNBC, and Shantanu's on there talking about shopping and the shopping experience coming up. And it's going to be interesting with the whole COVID thing. What is that going to mean for online shopping? And so it's amazing to see that some of these things that started kind of in their infancy have really become critical scenarios. Then maybe as a kind of a final question, what are some things that you you learned? What were some best practices or things that you learned as a byproduct of this that you use in your business, and then maybe talk a little bit about your business and what you can do for customers?
Yeah, I think that the key lesson I learned is that for a SaaS product, especially one similar to Adobe Analytics, engagement is key. We used to keep engagement metrics, meaning like how many active users, 30-day logins, disabled logins, et cetera, make sure our clients were actually using the tool, because usage leads to value realization. Every single customer that I spoke to, James, when they were, everybody got a trial of Site Catalyst and many of them didn't convert. And the reason was 90% of the time it was, I don't see the value. So we started to value proof things. We started to make engagements that were like very defined. Here's the outcome of the engagement. Here's what you will get when we're done. Here's the benefit of that, et cetera. And really starting to productize our service offerings. I think that was really key in terms of turning the corner in success, because like I said, if people aren't using the product, they're not going to see value. If they don't see value, they'll leave. The other major lesson I learned is that nobody wants to admit that their data sucks. This was really evident when I was at Google, to do the attribution work, the way Google was trying to do it, where they're ingesting literally terabytes of data from online, offline, MMM, over the top television, out of doors, advertising, and trying to make an amalgam of touch points. How much was that banner that was ignored? What was that worth? Was it 0.3 of a cent? Really trying to apply all of that requires a ton of data, and the data has to be clean, recent, and trustworthy. And so seldom did I come into an organization that could check all the boxes in terms of data hygiene. So, that was the other thing, is like data is the lifeblood of every company right now. It's their second greatest asset next to their people. And, they really need to ensure that it's looked after and cared for very carefully. Those two things I just saw over and over and over again.
That's great. What are some of the things you can do for companies? I know you're involved with some of the largest companies in the industry. You've got a ton of experience. What are the things that you focus on as part of your business that you maybe gleaned from your time at Omniture, et cetera? What can you do for people?
Mostly I've been
speak highly of yourself and talk about some of the different things that you can do to help.
I'd like to call myself a sea change agent, because you need to be a good change agent, and I like to bring about large, meaningful change. So I've been doing a good deal of management consulting, both locally and remotely. I've worked remote almost my entire career, so this is nothing new to me, and I appreciate that. But most of my work is focused on either organizational excellence, how to organize and build a practice for a specific purpose, how to scale an existing practice, and then I do some work around attribution and analytics, both vendor selection as well as talent. Do we have the right team on board? Is our data in the right shape to even embark on an attribution program? So those are kind of the four areas: attribution analysis, vendor and talent management, and management consulting.
Yeah, and I know you just recently did a presentation at Observe Point's recent show, so I recommend everybody to check out their customer event. What is the name of that again? I'm sorry, David. It's
Validate.
Validate. That's right. That's right. Well, David, I appreciate so much your time. I know you're a busy guy. I will always have fond memories of you and Avonlea and I kind of, and Ray kind of in the foxhole together. I think the work that we did there was phenomenal. I think it really, really set up the success that Omniture had and then ultimately Adobe had as we went through the process. And, there were good days and bad days, but there were more good days. And it was my pleasure to get to know you and Avonlea and Ray and all the whole gang down there. So it was
always looked forward to your visits, and people were asking me like when James is coming back. So you became pretty popular here as well.
I appreciate that. Thanks again. Appreciate you, and all the best. We'll stay in touch. Thanks.
Okay, absolutely. My pleasure. Take care.